The woman was lying against the stone wall of the luxury hotel, bleeding beneath the bright afternoon sun, while hundreds of people walked past her as if she were invisible. Some looked away. Some slowed down long enough to stare. One man even stepped around her handbag so he would not have to get too close. She had one hand pressed against her bruised cheek and the other wrapped tightly around her ribs, trying desperately to keep herself from crying. Then the sound of several black vehicles approaching filled the street. A convoy of expensive cars moved toward the hotel, surrounded by heavily guarded men. Nobody expected the vehicles to stop. Nobody expected the man inside the first car to step out. And nobody expected him to kneel beside the woman everyone else had ignored. If you believe that kindness can give someone a second chance when the whole world has turned its back on them, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy. Sometimes one small act of kindness can change a life forever. It was a warm afternoon in the heart of Bellevue City, the kind of afternoon when sunlight reflected from the glass towers and expensive cars lined the streets outside the city's finest hotels. Businessmen hurried toward meetings, tourists took photographs, and wealthy guests entered through the golden doors of the Grand Aurelia Hotel. In the middle of all that beauty, however, sat a woman named Seraphina Vale, wearing a torn beige coat over a black dress. Her dark hair was tangled, one side of her face was swollen, and a thin line of dried blood ran from the corner of her mouth to her chin. She looked exhausted beyond words. She had been sitting there for almost 40 minutes, hoping that someone, anyone, would stop. Seraphina had not always looked like that. Only a few months earlier, she had been working as an assistant at a small accounting firm across town. She was quiet, responsible, and known for helping elderly clients who struggled with paperwork. Her life had never been luxurious, but it had been peaceful. Everything changed when she discovered that her employer was secretly moving money through fake accounts. Seraphina had found documents that proved it, and when she threatened to report the fraud, powerful people became interested in making sure she stayed silent. The person who came after her that morning was not a stranger. He was a man she had once trusted, someone who had promised to protect her. Instead, he had beaten her, stolen her phone, and warned her that if she went to the police, things would become worse. Seraphina had managed to escape when a neighbor heard her screaming and opened a door. She ran without knowing where she was going until she reached the Grand Aurelia Hotel. She thought a place filled with security guards and wealthy people would be safe. She was wrong. The hotel entrance was crowded, but nobody wanted trouble. A security guard glanced at her from behind the glass doors and then looked away. A woman carrying shopping bags stared at Seraphina for several seconds before whispering something to her husband and walking past. A businessman took out his phone, but instead of calling for help, he took a picture and continued toward his car. Seraphina tried to stand, but pain shot through her side, forcing her back against the wall. She whispered to herself that she only needed one person to care. Then the black convoy appeared. The first SUV moved slowly through the street, followed by two more vehicles. Men in dark suits walked beside them, scanning the surroundings with serious expressions. People immediately stepped away from the road. Conversations became quieter. Everyone knew who was arriving. His name was Cassian Moretti, a man whose reputation had spread through Bellevue long before his face became familiar. He was called a mafia boss by newspapers, a criminal by authorities, and a businessman by those who worked for him. Cassian controlled shipping companies, nightclubs, private security firms, and several legitimate businesses. He was feared because people believed he had the power to destroy anyone who crossed him. But the truth about Cassian was more complicated than the rumors. He had grown up in poverty, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs. His father had been murdered when Cassian was young, and the only person who had protected him afterward was an elderly shopkeeper who once gave him food when he had nothing. Cassian had spent his entire adult life surrounded by violence, but there was one thing he never forgot, the feeling of being helpless while everyone else looked away. That afternoon, as his convoy approached the hotel, Cassian noticed something that made him raise his hand. The vehicles stopped. His security team immediately became alert, but Cassian opened the door himself. He stepped onto the sidewalk and looked toward Seraphina. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Cassian walked toward her. The people around them became silent. Seraphina looked up at him with frightened eyes. She tried to move away, believing another threat had come for her, but her injured body refused to cooperate. Cassian stopped several feet away instead of touching her. He saw the bruises on her face, the torn sleeve, and the way she held her ribs. He removed his expensive black jacket and carefully placed it around her shoulders. Seraphina stared at him as though she could not understand why someone so powerful would care about someone like her. Cassian looked around at the crowd. Nobody met his eyes. He asked his driver to call a doctor immediately and instructed his security team to secure the area. Then he crouched beside Seraphina and told her that she was safe now. His voice was calm, not threatening. For the first time that day, Seraphina allowed herself to cry. The doctor arrived within minutes. At the private medical clinic owned by one of Cassian's associates, Seraphina was examined and treated. She had bruised ribs, a fractured wrist, and a deep cut near her eyebrow, but thankfully nothing life-threatening. When she woke several hours later, she expected to be alone. Instead, she found Cassian sitting near the window. He had not left. Seraphina immediately became nervous and tried to sit up. Cassian told her not to move. He explained that he had no interest in hurting her and that she could leave whenever she wanted. He also told her that the man who attacked her had been identified through the hotel's security cameras. Seraphina finally revealed the truth about the financial records she had discovered. She told him about the fake accounts, the stolen money, and the powerful people involved. Cassian listened without interrupting. What surprised her was not his anger. It was the sadness in his eyes. Cassian knew the name of the company involved. He had heard rumors about them before. But he had never imagined that an ordinary employee could have uncovered the entire operation. He promised Seraphina that nobody would force her into silence again. The following morning, however, fear returned. Someone had broken into Seraphina's apartment. Nothing valuable had been taken. Her television remained untouched. Her jewelry was still there. The only thing missing was a small folder containing copies of the financial records. Cassian immediately understood the message. Someone was watching her. Instead of hiding Seraphina away, he gave her a choice. She could enter a protected residence until the investigation was completed, or she could return to her old life with professional security. Seraphina chose the protected residence, but she made one condition: she wanted to continue working. Cassian respected that. For the next several weeks, Seraphina slowly rebuilt her life. She began working with investigators, organizing documents, and helping expose the financial network. Cassian never treated her like a helpless victim. He treated her like someone who had survived something terrible and still had the courage to stand again. But there was another change happening quietly. Cassian began to change too. Before Seraphina entered his life, Cassian believed kindness was a weakness. He believed people only helped others when they wanted something in return. Seraphina challenged that belief simply by continuing to care about people around her. One afternoon, she noticed a young cleaner struggling to carry several boxes. Seraphina immediately helped her. Another day, she found an elderly security guard eating lunch alone and sat with him. She never talked about how powerful Cassian was or how much money he had. She simply treated people with dignity. Cassian watched all of it. He realized that the woman he had rescued was now teaching him how to rescue himself from the person he had become. Months later, the financial investigation finally reached the people responsible. The corrupt executives were arrested, the stolen money was recovered, and Seraphina's evidence became the foundation of the case. The man who had beaten her was also arrested. On the day Seraphina walked into court, she was no longer wearing the torn coat from that afternoon. She wore a simple navy dress, her wrist healed, her face clear, and her head held high. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded her. One asked how she had found the courage to come forward. Seraphina looked across the street toward Cassian, who was standing beside his car. She smiled and said that sometimes courage begins when one person decides not to look away. Cassian lowered his eyes. He remembered that afternoon outside the hotel. Hundreds of people had seen her. Hundreds had done nothing. He had stopped because he knew what it felt like to need someone and find nobody there. But the greatest surprise came later. Seraphina did not disappear from his life after the case ended. Instead, she started a small foundation for victims of domestic and workplace violence. Cassian quietly funded the first shelter without putting his name on the building. Seraphina eventually discovered it was his money, and she confronted him about it. He simply told her that he had once been saved by a stranger who expected nothing in return. Now it was his turn to pass that kindness forward. Years later, the Grand Aurelia Hotel still stood exactly where it had been that afternoon. People still walked through its golden doors. Cars still stopped along the street. But outside the entrance stood a small bronze plaque placed beside a garden of white flowers. It carried a simple message about compassion and the danger of looking away when someone is suffering. Seraphina often visited that garden. One bright afternoon, she stood there with several women from her foundation while children played nearby. Cassian arrived without his convoy that day. No bodyguards. No expensive cars. Just a quiet man carrying 2 cups of coffee. Seraphina smiled when she saw him. She remembered the terrified woman sitting against that wall. She remembered believing that nobody cared. And she remembered the moment one man stepped out of a black vehicle and decided that her pain mattered. That moment had not magically erased everything she had suffered. It had not changed the past. But it had given her something more important. A reason to believe that her future could be different. And Cassian learned something too. Being powerful did not mean having the ability to control everyone around you. Real power was being able to stop when everyone else kept walking. Real strength was protecting someone who had nothing to offer you. And sometimes, the person you save becomes the person who saves your heart. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in compassion, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy. Your support helps these emotional stories reach people who may need a little hope today. Special request, before you leave, comment "I will never look away" if you believe that one act of kindness can change a person's entire life. Because somewhere in the world, there may be a Seraphina sitting alone against a wall, believing nobody sees her. And maybe the next person who walks past her will be you. So when life gives you the choice between looking away and stopping, remember this story. Sometimes, stopping for just one broken person is the beginning of saving an entire life.